You guys, welcome to the latest episode of Beyond the Tape, a podcast where we talk to people doing rad things in the mountain bike industry, preferably in Australia, but sometimes you go overseas, just like in this case. Before we move on too far, though, let's have a chat about some supporters of the podcast. This podcast is brought to you by, first off, the guys at Trek. These guys do rad bikes and help me out a bunch. But the other day, I was hurting. The old soft tissue in the rear end was getting a bit inflamed and hurting a fair bit after a big day in the saddle. So naturally, everyone's a bit different and they require different saddles. Thankfully, Bontrager do a bunch of different saddles in a bunch of different sizes. So if you head into your local Trek dealer or Bontrager parts dealer and get your ass measured, they'll measure your sits bones, find the correct width, and even help you choose what saddle's the best. I end up going with the Verscomp bike saddle. I just found that to be the best for my situation. I know what I kind of like anyway. The best thing is, though, if you don't like it, you've got a 30-day unconditional guarantee. So after a few weeks, like 3 to 4 weeks of riding, and you still can't get on with the saddle, take it back to your track dealer, swap it out for a new one, or possibly even get a refund. So instead of just buying a saddle and then throwing it in the shed where it's going to live for the next 20 years, make sure you head out to your local track dealer, get measured, get the right seat, and try out a few if you need to. But more often than not, you might just get the right one off the bat. The next supporter is FE Sports, and they bring you brands such as 100% Eyewear. Now, I'm a huge fan of the S2 100% glasses. They look rad, provide plenty of field of vision, get rid of all the glare, but best of all, they're super tough. So I've actually treated these things pretty terribly, like most of my glasses end up, and they just keep on coming. So make sure you head up your local store and get them to bring in some of those sweet 100% glasses so you can ride good while looking good. NS Dynamics have been a huge supporter off the bat. These guys worked with a separate company for a little while, a couple of years back, working on something real unique, the Sprindex adjustable rate lightweight coil spring. So this coil is actually adjustable within 70 to 100 pounds of spring weight. So instead of having to have 6 or 7 different springs laying around if you're running a coil, with a quick spin of a dial, you can end up with a different spring rate. So it's great if you're looking to find the correct spring rate for your weight, or you want something that's quickly tunable and you don't have to remove the whole coil. Something I'd really dig. Lead Out Sports are also a huge supporter of the podcast. Now, we talked about toolboxes in the last Tech Talk. One of my favorite tools is actually one of my smallest tools. You know what they say, it's not about size. The disc wrench from Pedro's is probably 10 centimeters long, has a 7 and an 8 mil crowfoot at each end, perfect for doing up your lever bolts or your compression nuts to the point where they won't round out and correct torque. But the best thing is this has also got a rotor straightening tool in it. So it's a 3-in-1 deal, super tiny, might even fit on your keyring if you want it. But it's indispensable. One of the coolest little tools I've ever had. Fist Handwear. Now, while they are called Fist Handwear, they also do a bunch of socks. Man, they do some funky looking rad socks, but they are super, super soft, made from soft cotton with stretch mesh ventilation throughout. So they keep your feet cool and dry. They're cushioned on the bottom, but they've also got targeted arch compression through the top of the foot. So I'm a huge fan of these socks and honestly can't get enough. And thankfully they match your gloves if you want to go down that route. Franked, huge sponsor. They offer high-tech riding gear out of WA. They have a new waterproof jacket on the way. So I'm not sure if it's actually waterproof. I'm not sure it exists. Apparently it's a camo pattern. All I've seen is some photos of some dudes riding in what looks like something. But yeah, I'm pretty keen to see this. So keep an eye on franked.com.au to check out that new jacket. As it is getting wet, don't forget to use some Crush wet lube on your chain. These guys are killing it. Australian designed, Australian made for the Australian conditions. So what else can you say? And again, winter, you're going to need to keep your forks and your eyes clean. So head over to Dirt Surfers, get yourself a rag guard, 100% recycled, 100% recyclable, and man, they keep the environment out of your eyes while looking after the environment. Anyways, this podcast is with Chase Warner from Trinity Mountain Bikes. He is the designer and brains trust behind 1/3 of the project, hence why it's called Trinity. Mick Williams is the other, and Nigel Reeve. We go in to talk about a bunch of stuff, including drift cars. So it's a sick little chat. Hopefully you enjoy it. And as per usual, grab a beer, grab a water, grab a wine, grab whatever makes you happy, and enjoy this episode.
It's like the internet is such a weird place. Like, I had no intention of this whole project ending up where it has. Like, when we posted that, I think the first like big like reaction we had was that suspension cycling video from the first frame, and it has like 225,000 views, and it's like what the heck? There's that many people interested in this? Like, it just blows my mind.
Yeah, I think you guys have broken the internet more than enough times.
More than a few times, yeah. I know. I was looking on the WRP page. I think one of the first videos that Mick did of our gearbox idea, it's in there like 5 millions, and it's just insane. And like the amount of reshares, like I couldn't, because I for the most part manage the Trinity account, and I couldn't keep up with like, you know, the kind of the classic like resharing of like the people who share your stuff. Like there was just too many. I couldn't keep track. Like I couldn't tell if like, is that the same account from yesterday that shared it, or is this a different one? Because, you know, Instagram only has so much history for like the shares and the notifications you get. So it's like I just couldn't keep up. It was the strangest feeling. It was yeah, it was just wild.
It's funny, like you on Pink Bike and stuff, and then I think yesterday some ran like a pretty big website shared like their prediction for 2023, and it was literally like a common sale with a gearbox set up like the WRP one. Like, so good.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's so rad.
Yeah, sweet. We'll keep on rolling then. For those who don't know, who are you and what are you going to do?
Yeah, so my name is Chase Warner. I'm the founder of Trinity Mountain Bikes. I'm from Northern California, but my better halves are in Oz, Mick and Nigel, yeah, I mean, I love bikes. That's how I kind of got into this.
Yeah.
But
how did you kind of get in touch with those guys? Like, how do they come onto your radar?
Yeah, so it was through Nigel, and I had known about Nigel since probably about 2008, 2009, when he started the blog for his Ute project.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I, like, growing up, always been into pretty much anything mechanical. My dad's a big car guy, and so that was kind of always a part of like my life growing up, working on cars and learning about cars, and it was pretty much just completely surrounded by that. And so when I started in high school, I like found what drifting was.
Yeah.
And was just absolutely 100% obsessed. And and so just like scouring the internet for anything and everything that I could find. And I think through Speed Hunters, I came across Nigel's blog and was just captivated by everything that he was doing. Just like the fact that this guy was doing all of this crazy chassis fabrication work out of his garage. And so I've been following him for years, and then I don't remember exactly when it started, because he kind of like for a while, it was like all about the ute until he got that finished. And then he kind of transitioned to doing a lot more stuff with motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
And then that led to him like showing and sharing more about like him riding his downhill bike and his dirt jumper and all that. And when I got back into bikes in like early 2018, and then perpetually like kind of started down this path of like, what would it be like to build my own bike? I knew that he was into it, and I knew that he had the capabilities to build something. And so I just shot him an email, just randomly, like on my lunch while I was at my day job. And lo and behold, he emailed me back like a day or so later. And I sent some renderings of some stuff I'd put together and whatnot. And he was just like, yeah, I'm in. Like, he's like, I've been wanting to make my own bike for a long time. And pretty much like magically somehow, like everything that I was interested in doing in the bike, he was as well. And so he was like, let's just figure this out. And it was about the same time that he was moving to his workspace at Deacon at Manny Futures, or had just moved there. And his office space was right next to Mick's. And so I think Mick was either passing by and like, peeked over the shoulder, or Nigel was like, hey, come check this out. And that's how Mick, came to join the conversation. It was literally all just by happenstance.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it is crazy. And then what's funny is like, now looking back, I mean, it's been 2.5 years since like Nigel and I started like the conversation. And I talk to those guys literally every day. I talk to them more than some people that I see every day for the last 2 years. And we've never met yet. We've never met in person. It's all via Instagram and video chats and whatnot. But it's been a really wild ride and really fun. And it's cool to like, it's so awesome to across the globe, like find someone that shares the same level of commitment and passion for like this idea that I had. And it's just really cool. I think from like early on as a kid, like I've always been designing stuff for pretty much any hobby that have been in. Like my dad was a contractor and a draftsman, and my grandpa was an art teacher and designed women clothes. So like I've been like, they've been teaching me how to draw since I was super, super little, like 3 or 4 years old. And I was like I would draw like side views and schematics of cars and planes and everything like that. And so like any hobby, I would like go down to the nth degree of like, okay, if I could do it myself, what would it look like? And that's just kind of like, it's partly how like, I think I like learn and really like get myself involved in something new, and really kind of just like soak up all that knowledge and information, is like taking it to the idea of like, what would it look like if I did it myself? And and so I naturally did that with mountain biking when mountain bikes when I picked that up as a hobby again. And so, yeah, just to like put something together and then see someone else's like interests and shared passion is just like, it's just really cool.
Yeah, I think it's funny, like you're 3 people from different parts of the world. You're all DIY enthusiasts times a million, and you've all kind of connected over this one project. Like if people haven't checked out the Engineered to Slide blog, you're not doing life right. Just go and look at that now.
Seriously. Yeah.
And then WRP is just like, Mick is, I want to do this, I'll build it. Like it's just a different thought process, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that was kind of the point that I was getting to, or I meant that I was trying to get to, was like, it's been so cool, like growing up and drawing all of these things and having all of these ideas, but never had either the like the access to resources or people to like actually make one of those things like come to happen, like actually like physically be made. And this is the first time that's ever happened. And the even weirder part is that I've never seen it in person. Like the one's still hung up in the shop at Mick's place, and I've only ever seen photos of it. But it's still cool to know that it's like a real thing in the world, of something that was in my head, like actually like finally got made after 26 years of mulling over ideas in my brain. Yeah, it's been pretty awesome.
And I mean, like, we get all this talk about social media being a bad thing, and it can be, and misuse and whatnot, but it's literally managed to connect you guys from other sides of the world in a time where there was no travel or anything, because you basically started when COVID hit.
Oh yeah.
It's so amazing to see.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like, I think that like trying to find like the silver lining in things, like that was one of the benefits of like with being in COVID, is like we were kind of just stuck inside. Like we had more time on our hands, and to just kind of sit and tinker digitally, or with Nigel like at his house. And so I think it kind of made a little incubator for making this happen, because we just had more time on our hands.
What was I guess we'll start a little bit at the beginning, but you've obviously ridden bikes for a while. What was it about current bikes that are mass produced and on the mass market that you didn't like, and what kind of led you to starting the design?
I think, I don't know if it was really anything that was currently out there that I wasn't satisfied with. I mean, there's so many good products out there. Like, it's pretty hard to buy a bad bike nowadays.
Exactly.
And I think really what it was more about was not a dissatisfaction, but more of a curiosity in like my own brain, of like my own thoughts about what would make a good kinematic, and what would have a good ride feel. And like coming from like the car background that I have, like I used to work for an air suspension company for a number of years, called AccuAir.
Oh, cool. Yeah, right.
So I worked in their marketing department for like 3 years, but got the privilege of being involved in a lot of the engineering meetings, and worked right next to the R&D department. And so got to, in the off hours, get my hands dirty and, review models and study and learn from the engineers that were there. And so I think just that natural curiosity and understanding of like, okay, like I have these concepts and I have these ideas of what I know of like vehicle dynamics and how they interact with each other. And as I was like really trying to dive into understanding bicycle kinematics and rider input, and how the suspension manages the weight and the forces and everything, it was like, I wonder like if I could do it better, like if like not every, like a lot of what am I trying to say? So like there's a lot of different iterations of mountain bike suspension, and a lot of them been done well. And obviously like the classic 4-bar with a rocker link, like everything looks like a session, like it's been done. It's like tried and true. And there is room for like new ideas. And what the Trinity is not necessarily new. An inverted horse link's been done before. The Norco range is like that, which that's another thing we can get to, because I was a little bit bummed when that came out. Or not bummed, but like it beat us to the punch a little bit. But yeah, inverted horse link had been done even prior to that. It just wasn't as common.
Yeah.
But I was just trying to explore like new, just different ideas, trying to research what has been done in the past, and figure out why, people stopped doing it, or why people kept, going down, certain paths, and understanding what makes a good bike, and what feels good to ride and what doesn't. And so it's just this kind of just exploration of like, can I make something good? Can I make something that's really good? And so that's kind of, I think, where my desire to try and do my own thing came from. Not necessarily, a lack of, or a displeasure with what's currently out there.
Yeah. I mean, like, you guys use iTrack suspension, or have used iTrack suspension in some of your designs. And I mean, I rode a Craftworks from Hugh for a year or so. And man, like, it's funny you say beat him to the punch, because he was thinking about this stuff 6-7 years ago. And man, that Craftworks was one of the best bikes I've ever ridden. It was insane how good that bike was. And then to see it all heading off now is like, oh, where are you guys?
Yeah, I know. It's been cool to see too, just like how, like, all these other brands are now either pretty close to infringing on his stuff and not putting his name on it, or like Intense, I think did it right and actually, give credit where credit's due. And according to Mick and Nigel, because like I said, I haven't ridden it yet, but I mean, the V1, when we used iTrack, they said it was awesome. And it's, I mean, for those who don't understand iTrack, and its different variations, because there's a lot of different variations, but it's putting the idler on a link of the suspension. So that's where like bikes like the Trek Session can get around it, because they use ABP, and the seat stay and the chain stay are concentric to each other around the rear axle. The idler on the chainstay, even though it's not concentric with the main pivot, is considered to be on the swing arm for the rear axle, and therefore it doesn't void or void the patent for iTrack. And so that's how they were able to get around it. But in theory, what it does by putting the idler on the link of the suspension, depending on where you put it, it's all about managing the distance between the engaged link on the idler and the engaged link on the cassette. Because as the suspension cycles, what plays into creating anti-squat is the chain tension, which is also why pedal kickback is related to it as well. So if you can put that idler in a spot where it's cycling with the suspension, and essentially, like in our case, moving in the same direction as the rear wheel as closely as possible, minimizing the chain growth from the engaged link on both cogs, is what kept a pretty steady curve for our anti-squat. And then also minimize pedal kickback, because it's also like, it's a little bit higher than it is now on this V2, where we're running it straight off the frame. And I can get into the differences on why we're looking at changing it up from iTrack to to just kind of a standard idler mount. But so it's just really about managing those chain forces. And the reason why the pedal kickback was a little bit higher on the first one is just because it is moving in the direction of the rear wheel, means it's moving slightly away from the front chain ring, but less so than it would be without it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it allows you to tune that pedal kickback and the anti-squat through the suspension travel, right? Like where you put that link is going to allow you to tune it. So you could almost have no anti-squat when you're fully in your compression and just allow the rear end to move, right?
There's always going to be a certain level of anti-squat. So think of, so if you were to have no chain in the system, how you lay out the links will still naturally have anti-squat. And the easiest way to look at that is actually look at your anti-rise.
Yeah.
So your anti-rise graph is going to be the same as your anti-squat if there's no chain in the system.
Yeah. Okay.
So
makes sense.
So there's always going to be a certain level of anti-squat, but the chain has a big play over it because it is essentially another link in the suspension cycling.
Yeah.
And so that's why managing those chain forces and that chain length with an idler is so important when you have a high pivot.
And I think like anti-squat is frowned upon because people think it might decrease suspension activity and movement when you're pedaling or when you're going through harder stuff with a chain on and whatnot, but it can actually be quite efficient. I think that's kind of where Nico Malali's going with his thing is, and he mentioned this, is that he's trying to find that balance of plow bike versus playful bike. Like there is that kind of concept there when it comes to high pivot. Has that been a struggle for you?
I mean, again, I'm like, most everything for me is theory based at this moment because I haven't ridden the bike.
Yeah.
And we haven't, I mean, pretty soon after this weekend, we'll be able to do some A and B testing as far as between the new anti-squat levels versus, from V2 to V1, and test that. And also we have, Mick's got his Supreme, and Nigel has his Demo 8 that we kind of have, like, as far as just like, we know those are known quantities as far as anti-squat feel and whatnot. And they've ridden those bikes a lot. So they know what the ride characteristic is like. Obviously there's a lot of other variables at play, but that feedback in the pedals and that feedback in the suspension when you do, when you are pumping for, a lip or to, hop the bike over something, the anti-squat is the platform that you're pushing your weight against.
Yeah.
And so, definitely dialing in the right amount at, your active sag is really, really important. And that's why, like, take Mondraker, for instance, they're testing the idler on their system because I'm not sure if you've dove into their kinematic at all, but that Summon runs pretty high anti-squat, like 200%, without the idler, just with the nature of those two short links and the amount of rotation they go through. And so by adding that idler, I think they're getting, for the riders, similar to kind of what O-Chain does in a sense, but they're getting more compliance in the pedals and less feedback in the pedals. But that's just their way of accomplishing it.
Yeah,
which I think is really smart.
I read somewhere like that their design is actually really good for an idler. Like to actually just put one on there is actually probably better than their stock.
Definitely. I don't know why it took them this long to do so. And I also don't know how their chains were lasting as long as they were. I'm sure that they were realistically, at least for the race team, were probably changing. And this is a complete guess and conjecture, but I would guess that they were changing chains after every weekend, if not more.
Yeah.
Just with the amount of stretch and growth in that system.
It'd be pretty hard to quantify whether it was a suspension or Brooke McDonough's sheer power, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think that's also why like it suited Lloyd Greenland pretty good, just because he's such a poppy and active rider. Like it gave a really active platform for him to push against. And I think that's why it suited him pretty well. I'm really enjoying watching him get along with that D10 this season. It's been pretty cool.
I think it's super important that people think about their frame kinematics when they're purchasing a bike. I mean, everyone wants to get into shock tuning and suspension. And I mean, it is important to a degree, but kinematics is very underplayed when it comes to, it's almost as important to geometry for me.
Oh, I agree. I completely agree. And I think it's pretty wild that most manufacturers don't offer graphs available to the customers. And
blows my mind.
Right. And I mean, I get it from the standpoint of like, I think even just a couple of years ago, people didn't care as much. As far as like, it was just like, let's just get out and ride. And I think there's just, and there's still a segment, that were really techie and really nerdy about everything. But I think there's more and more people as the mountain bike community gets more and more educated, through these online reviews, and through, passion projects like this, where, everything kind of gets shared. There's more and more interest in understanding the bikes they're riding and understanding their purchases. And especially as the market gets more and more flooded with bikes, like really like defining your product, like a kinematic is a huge part of it. And because it absolutely plays into the bike's ride characteristics and how it feels on the trail. Obviously like your other inputs, tires and suspension, are your other like really big main players in how the bike feels on the trail. But those are a lot more known quantities. Most people use the same tires no matter what bike they're on. And oftentimes like people are pretty loyal to the suspension that they use. So those are, when they move from bike to bike, those are pretty known quantities. But the kinematic is something that can't be changed,
exactly.
when you get a frame, unless you go to someone like Cascade Components. But even then, it's a fixed change. Whereas, so I completely agree. I think companies should really share that aspect of their bikes and how they're designed and why. Like, get rid of all the marketing bullshit and just show me the graphs. Like, I don't need you to tell me that it's better. I need you to show me how the bike works. It's essentially in theory. And that's going to give me a way more informed decision than throwing 17 acronyms that this bike has. And, it's the plushest of the plush, and it's got, whatever, 17 different acronyms attached to it saying that it's the best thing ever. None of that matters.
I mean, like, it's funny. I kind of got in a pink bike argument with a few people on a certain brand's website, and it was frustrating to me that companies don't understand that people want this information and that you have to go to a third-party website. I think it's linkage.com or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's Linkage Design at Blogspot.
Yeah.
I use it. That guy, he's awesome. I really appreciate him and what he does.
It's crazy that we've got a whole market segment going to a Blogspot website to get more information than companies. Like, it's just blows my mind.
Yeah, it's wild.
But then, like, you got companies like Forbidden, which nail it. I don't know if you've looked at their website, but
100%.
That's the best by far.
I definitely agree. The way that they have everything set up, and whatnot, it was definitely a big inspiration for a lot of elements of the Trinity. And because when like in some of like my first like sketches and whatnot, I was kind of went through a lot of different designs as far as like short dual link like DW, or just even for like the first frame that I was thinking of doing, like just doing a classic single pivot, no linkage.
Full orange
just to, but just to understand it. And that's what I started with, was just starting with something basic in linkage X3, and just understanding, what changes affect the kinematic, and, how important, the main pivot location is, and how, locating the shock and where you locate the shock, and how it goes through its rotation, how that affects both the leverage ratio, but the force is going into the shock, and how much articulation it sees, and all those different things. So it was a really good place to start. But yeah, I kind of just played around with everything. And then high pivots weren't ever really like on my radar until Forbidden came out. And I started paying attention to, what they were talking about, but then started to dig into it a lot more. And to me, it just seemed like the better way to go. Like, you're going to get the rider more centered in the bike, and in compression and active sag, and you're going to get the wheel deflecting in the direction it wants to move. And so there just seems like a lot of pros for a very minor con of having an extra cog and a 1% less efficiency. Like, unless you're an XC racer, like, you're not going to notice it. You may hear it, but like for any of the like the comments that I've read on the various websites of people saying they, really truly notice the difference, I'm like, that's, you could chalk that up to placebo effect. Like, you could change something else. You could probably have put a double down on the same time that you switch to a high pivot bike, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference on which one was, less efficient, of having, double down casing tires and adding that much more rotational weight versus having an idler. Like, I guarantee you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
And they probably haven't cleaned and lubed their drivetrain in 500 years.
Way more of an effect on overall efficiency. And I think those numbers are interesting to look at, but I think unless you're an XC racer, like, it doesn't matter. Like, ride the bike that feels comfortable and that you have the most fun on. And who gives a shit about how efficient it is or how light it is? If it's fun, it's fun.
Yeah.
If it lets you go fast, like, that's in my opinion, the more important thing.
Yeah. If you got a smile on your face at the end of the ride, that's all that matters. Was it kind of hard balancing geo numbers to suspension design, considering you think that suspension design is so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything to make a bike come together. Everything's a compromise. And so it's just figuring out where you're willing to make those compromises. And also, I think really setting a goal for like what you want the bike to ride like. Like, you can throw every little bit of tech at the suspension design, and you can make it as long and as slack as you want to, just to keep up with the numbers. But I think if you don't have a target, like, ideal ride characteristic at the beginning of it, like, you're just going to end up kind of with a slug of a bike. Or because I think, and this is me personally, but I think we're kind of tapped out on reach. If in many cases, I think we're far too long. And Mick and I have had a lot of discussions about this, but he rides a lot of moto. Growing up, I rode dirt bikes, not so much, as an adult, but anyway, just that, like, knowing that cockpit feel. And we're definitely, like, the way that I ride is a lot more upright, and I definitely steer the bike with my hips. And really, like I don't use a ton of, some might say, like, body English, to my riding. Like, I'm really trying to, like, push everything through the pedals and make the bike do the work instead of my body doing the work. And so that also lends to, like, I prefer a slightly shorter reach, and you'll kind of see that reflected in the numbers that we have for our kind of, like, standard geometry sizes. And so, like, for me, I'm 5'7", and most brands would put me on a medium, which these days could range anywhere from 450 to, like,
500,
465, or even greater. And it to me, it seems ridiculous. I've ridden a few different bikes, and the bike that I had for a while was a 2016 Da Vinci Troy, and it had a 440 reach. And even then, at times, that felt like too much for the way that I rode. I was always too much over the front end, and I did everything to get myself off. Like, I had 45 mil rise bars. I had like 20 mil spacers under the stem. I was running a 35 mil stem. So I had everything as far back and as high up as you could go. I was trying to look like Jack Moyer. And I mean, his results speak for themselves. But anyway, it's trying to just bring it in, because one, like, I just felt like it was always just slammed over the front end. But it just didn't work because I didn't move around a lot on the bike. But the other thing I was kind of starting to pay attention to is, like, your biokinematics, like how you move. Because, like, moving on the bike is still really important, even though I personally don't do it a ton, just in my riding style. But the one thing that I notice is, like, as the reach gets longer, you get a more stable ride because you have an effective longer wheelbase. And it's more comfortable with steeper seat tubes because you have more, essentially, leg room.
Yes.
But for those riding styles where people move around a lot on the bike and are pushing the bike around, the more you stretch your reach out, like, if you hold your hands out, like, super far, you can only, like, from where your pivot point is at your hips, like, you can only move your chest so far forward and so far back because you're already stretched out. And so you can't move around as much, and you can't shift your weight fore and aft over the front and rear tire. And so as you shorten that reach, you have more room to move your body around and weight the bike differently. And if you really want a more stable bike, you're better off lengthening your rear center and slackening your head angle, in my opinion, than stretching the reach out. I'd be far more inclined to ride a 430 bike with a 62 degree head angle than a 470 no reach and a 64 degree head angle. Like, I would rather be more upright and more tight in and be able to shift the weight on the bike where I want to, versus being locked in a position and just kind of letting the bike do all the work underneath me.
Yeah. I think that's really important to touch on is rider style and how that matches with the bike and why you need all that information from the manufacturer. Like, I'm 6'2", 3 at 188 centimeters or whatever. And I ride a large with like a 470 reach and little bike because I'm the same. Like, I don't want to move around on the bike as much as I should. And because the wheelbase is shorter, my movements have to be, I can do minuscule movements and still have the same effect as if I was on a long reach bike. I noticed you did size specific seat stays. Chain stays as well. Like that makes so much sense to me as well, because, you know, a large rider on 430 mil stays it means you have to ride on the front so much to keep front edge traction.
Definitely. And even like there's more that I want to explore with that. I've done some like spreadsheet mathematical studies of keeping weight bias weight bias ratios the same per size.
Yeah.
I kind of around the theory of lengthening your front and rear centers as you go up in size versus just making the reach grow.
Yeah.
So like with what we currently have, it works relatively good as far as like keeping. So like I think I don't have the spreadsheet open, but like take the T2 size. It's a 440 reach with 440 stays and, you know, 64-degree head angle. Well, at your static sag on that size, the chain stays are, I think, 452. And so then what that puts you at is roughly like a 33% weight bias over the front and like 66 over the rear.
Yeah.
And so keeping kind of that 2/3, 1/3 ratio. And I think from there, with going up in size, it's it only just adjusts like 1 or 2% as far as decreasing, since we're increasing the chain stays by 10 mil with each size. So it's pretty close, but some of the other spreadsheets that I was playing around with was keeping like that 66 and that 33 for the whole, you know, size range, as far as like, say the reach goes up 25 mil each size. What I was seeing was that to keep that exact ratio, like the chain stays were growing by like, it was like anywhere between like 15 to 22 mil each size, like kind of in that range. And then the head angle would change by a degree each size. So by a size, you know, XL, if like the medium was at a 64, then the size extra large was at like a 61 or 60 and a half. And that seems crazy. But what that does is it keeps your, like the wheelbase, you know, you're keeping that stability and lengthening the wheelbase, but you're keeping the exact same balance for each rider size.
Yeah.
Across the bike. So you always have the same weight distribution, which is also really important to your kinematic, because pretty much like your anti-squat is dictated based on like your center of mass. And so if your center of mass is distributed differently, like size per size, because your ratio of where that weight sits on the bike between the two contact patches, like it's going to affect actually what that anti-squat value is for each size. And also, and I mean, rider weight plays into it as well, and rider build type, because each body type kind of carries their weight in a slightly different spot too. So there's a myriad of variables there, but I would, on another design that lends itself better to the chain stays growing that drastically, would like to play with that idea of keeping a weight balance ratio exactly the same for each size of bike that's made. I think it'd be really hard to test too, unfortunately, because you can't have the same rider ride necessarily 4 different sizes and feel comfortable. So you'd have to find 4 different riders with, you know, essentially a relatively same skill level, and be able to give consistent feedback I mean, you could do it probably with some from data acquisition as well to get an aspect of it, but it would be hard to test. But I think there's something to the theory, and that's partly like what you see like with Paul Aston and that new common cell that he's doing, which is that's a beautiful build. I think that thing's awesome. But making 495 mil chain stays for the XL, which I think in at least the study that I did with the geo numbers in the XL, I think the chain stays that I came out to for the XL was around 495 or 500.
It's I mean, like you've seen
obviously for the given reach, but I think it'd be interesting.
I think like we've seen Norco do something similar with their shore. I think they did something along those lines, but having a longer chainstay as well, like everyone thinks it's a misconception. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people think it's longer chainstays don't corner as well. But
that's such BS. It's just because they don't know how to ride the bike that they're on. Like, and I'm not trying to be a dick about it, but like, you can learn how to ride anything. And if you're comfortable with short chainstays and you think that they corner well,
sweet,
and you like that ride feel, dude, ride it all the time. But if you jump on a long chainstay bike and you don't get along with it, well, that's just because you're not used to it. Like it's a different riding style to ride a bike like that, because again, it's keeping the weight more centered in the bike. And so that again also lends itself to, at least for me, my riding style is really steering the bike with your hips and with leaning. Definitely more like a motorcycle. And because the center of mass has essentially a smaller box, a smaller window to move in. And so it's just a different riding style, and not everyone gets along with it, and that's fine. But to say that they don't corner well that's just an incorrect statement. It just means that you just weren't riding it correctly.
When Brendan Faircloth puts longest stays on and says it corners well, then there's something to it, because damn, that guy can corner. It's sometimes about adaptation, which it's perfectly fine not to want to adapt to something. Like you just want to ride your bike.
Yeah.
What was it like seeing the high pivot revolution? Actually, before I ask that question, we're talking about chainstay length and all that type of thing and wheel travel. I was obviously Connor raced that, what they call a 150 more for travel bike at Fort William, and blew up the internet.
Yeah.
But that bike doesn't have 150, it has 154 mils of vertical travel from what I understand. But the axle is moving rearward. So technically it has more travel than 154.
Just barely. It's minimal. Because so like it's a pretty acute triangle if you look at it that way. So like it's the wheel displacement in the X direction on the graph, I think on the Forbidden is like, I think it's like 33, 35 millimeters. Right. But it's going up, 154. So for simple math, like we'll call it goes back 30. And so its run is 30 and its rise is 150. So that angle, that hypotenuse on that triangle is maybe a couple mil longer than 150 by like 2-3. I've done the math because I did the math on the Trinity as well to, see what the actual like angular travel or actual like, angular displacement of the wheel is. And it's not much greater. It's not like you're gaining 10 mil or 15 mil in that sense, as far as like difference in actual travel.
But 33 mil to chainstay length is huge, right? Like,
that's a lot. Yeah, it's a definite. And one of the theories by putting the pivot higher like that, and what some designers have done that I've read about is they're trying to match the displacement of the fork. So essentially matching the angular displacement of the front tire to the rear tire.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not going to be perfect because one's perfectly linear and one's rolling in an arc, but you can get pretty close.
Yeah.
And that's it's an interesting thought to do it that way. The thing that I think about with that is like you have your entire wheelbase shifting backwards from the direction of your mass, which is going, it's going forward, whereas, your contact patch is moving behind you. So that's going to be a pretty weird feeling. But I don't know how much stranger or more different it would be than obviously like, on a standard bike where the entire wheelbase shrinks, but comes in towards your center of mass under compression.
Yeah,
so
true.
It's definitely, again, it's just down to what you're used to, and what your rider preference is. So.
And what was your thoughts around the whole high pivot revolution of pretty much the last 2 years? Because
I think it's awesome.
There was a point where every bike, it was just like Pink Bike just copied and pasted all their titles because they're like high pivot. Like it's another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. I love seeing the variety in what people are doing, but also the similarities of what people are doing, because it just works. And I think high pivots have their place. I don't think it's, by any means the end all be all. Like they do, they can jump well. They don't jump as well. Mm-hmm. And that's just because, the nature of the rear center growing and the action of it moving, there's less like rebound force, which is why like oftentimes like the dampers for these high pivot bikes, they run a lot lighter rebound tune.
Definitely have to.
So, but I think for going fast down a hill, it's the best approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
unless you're Bruni.
Yeah, well, that's
he's
different.
An anomaly. So is Helens. They're pretty fantastic. But.
Yeah, it's all proven by that Commensale being the number one privateer bike by far.
Oh, for racing. Absolutely. Yeah, it's it definitely played a huge factor. I think in a lot of people exploring high pivots and then actually releasing high pivot bikes. I think there's also definitely just the marketing aspect of it too. In these bigger brands, it's definitely something to capitalize on.
Businesses that want to make money. Businesses that want to make money. It's a revolution. Who would have? Which is it always cops it.
Yeah, I know. I my personal opinion, I thought the Norco Shore was an interesting choice to make high pivot because the history of that bike being a free ride park bike. I wouldn't think would lend itself to being a high pivot. Now the range being high pivot, and they're soon to come out. If it comes out, DH bike being high pivot makes perfect sense. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting choice. And maybe, again, in my opinion, maybe a little bit of a marketing thing more than a actual intended use thing.
I think that thing just wanted to be a completely bomb-proof bike for everything because it weighs like 40 pounds, 40-something pounds, and it's 17 kilos or something without pedals and off the shop floor. Like next level. What's been
cracks?
Every bike cracks. It's like everything breaks.
Yeah, it does.
It's so that's the whole thing I can go down. But yeah, we're literally throwing pieces of metal designed to be as light as possible down a rocky hill at 45 km an hour.
Yeah,
like shit's gonna break.
Something's gonna break.
And we have an amazing industry support for it. Like, let's be honest. Like, there's no companies that go, nah, you can't have it because it broke. Yeah, like there's good support for most companies. So what's on that? Like, how's it been testing the V1 and making sure it holds up to everything? And how have you guys gone about that? Like, have you had many hurdles with that type of thing?
Oh yeah, no, we definitely had. And a lot of it came down to my inexperience because I, like, as a designer, like there's just like, I am and everything that I've done in my whole life, I've self-taught, like for all my hobbies and any my post-education from high school, just taught myself how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I designed the original rear end for V1, I did not think about bearing preload at all.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I had just made essentially like open pockets on both sides for the bearings to sit in, and nothing to distribute load to the outer race or the inner race for each piece of the suspension. So it was just pretty much the bearings in V1 were acting like bushings rather than bearings.
Oh, good.
And and so it obviously still cycled, but it was pretty sticky.
Yeah.
And with that too, it put really weird loads through those pivot areas, both in the bearing and the bearing pocket. And I was also at the time too, like a little bit more weight conscious than I should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And just ran some of the wall thickness on the seat and chainstays. Not too thin, but on the line. Like there a lot, most of it was like 2 mil thick, and 6061. And not that it was inadequate, especially with like the ribbing that I had in there. But you could definitely notice a lot of deflection. And so much so that and totally quite narrowed it down, but in my rocker link design, on V1, there's like 2 legs that come out to connect to the chainstay. And there's quite a chunk of it that's unsupported because it actually has to create a pocket for the tire. Because the chainstays were 430, so pretty tight to have a rocker link down there and that short of chainstay. And so there we got some twist in the rocker, and so now it's not quite aligned. So unfortunately right now V1's not rideable anymore. We're gonna have to either make a new rocker, or I'm gonna have to just do a quick redesign to the rear end to actually accommodate proper preloading. But which have all been taken care of in a V2. But that was definitely something that we noticed, and it did a while. Mick and Nigel did a ton of test rides before that happened. But it was, that's why we do prototypes, just to figure that stuff out, figure out how far we can push it and then pull it back just a little bit.
Yeah. So every company's doing this, right?
Yeah. But just not everyone shares it, which has been really fun. It's been fun to just kind of like have that kind of a little bit, on the world stage, as far as just like, this is what it's like to test the bike. This is what happens when, shit breaks.
It's cool to see like Mullally doing a similar thing as well.
I love it. I'm so stoked for that project. I love watching his content and, hearing his design decisions and what he likes to ride. And it's been really, really cool. Cause we're just we're just doing our own version of that.
He's doing his own version of yours. You guys can first.
Yeah, either way. We just aren't at the World Cup yet.
Mick will get there.
Yeah. No, it's definitely in the plans. It's to do some racing, and I've adjusted the kinematic too to definitely be more race oriented. That's kind of the goal now. I just definitely want to just take the bike racing. The first one was more just like, let's build a fun, free ride style bike, something that kind of fit the Aussie terrain, which I think that's a lot of people didn't get. Why would we do 170 and a 200 front end? And then I mean, according to Mick and Nigel and a lot of the other guys that I've either spoken to or read about, like, you guys have good terrain, but it's not the steepest or the gnarliest. So it doesn't always warrant having that 200 mil of travel. You can have a lot of fun with the way that we have it set up. And
I think
that's why we built it the way we did.
Well, I mean, it's been proven. Like Connor, 154. I'm pretty sure Blinky and like the Norco team are on 180.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't, 200 mil might seem better, but it doesn't always necessarily, more travel isn't more better all the time.
No, definitely not. There's a lot when it comes to, it's just how good the travel is. And most of that comes down to how good your damper is.
How did you go about choosing like suspension dampeners and who you're going to use on the bike? Like,
let's see. I can't remember if we were approached by EXT or if Mick had reached out to them. Either way, both Mick and I had read a lot about the EXT damper and really thought it would be a good fit. And so one way or another, we got connected with them, the distributor in Oz, and we're able to work with them. And it was really cool because we just, like, I sent them all the graphs for the bike, and, you know, Mick gave his weight and whatnot. And they sent over a shock that they had. And it was like Mick said, he just bolted it up and rode it, didn't touch a single dial on it. He just rode it as is. And he said it was awesome. If I'm remembering correctly, in Mick's terms, he said it put the Supreme to shame.
Yeah, okay.
That he had.
Yeah, right.
Which was also really rewarding to hear that, like, oh, shoot, like the ideas that I had are actually working. They're not just like some, you know, punter in his room, you know, thinking he's got something great on his hands. It was like, oh, it was some nice validation. But yeah, he said it was awesome. And actually, we after the fact, when we were taking the shock off, we were just measuring the frame and measuring some of the components. And so the first frame was supposed to have, and so is the second one, supposed to have 170 mil with a 65 mil stroke. Well, the shock that EXT had sent over, it was actually at 62 and a half, which meant that we were actually running with like 162 or 161 mil travel. Right. So about 10 less than what we thought. And Mick didn't even question it and still thought it rode better than his Supreme did, which, you know, I think the V4 has 210 or something like that. Yeah. So it's like a lot of it comes down to the quality of your travel, and that all comes down to how good your damper is.
Was it important to kind of isolate those torsional flexes and the bikes flexing to the shock as well? Is that something you guys have thought about?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we addressed in V2 is we were noticing that even with Loctite, because we were running a trunnion shock, which is a bit of a compromise in and of itself, but we have to do it because of we don't have to. But the way that the layout is, it's pretty tight to try and get a 250 eye-to-eye shock in there. So running trunnion was definitely more ideal, especially with adding the kind of the DH side to this. But with running the trunnion, after so many rides, the front bolts were loosening, and that's also because we didn't have any bearings up there. It was just straight through the sheet metal. So in V2 we have foot chips up at the front that have a bearing pressed into them. And so on V2, we can run two shock sizes. We can run a 205 eye-to-eye and a 225 eye-to-eye.
Yeah, cool.
So the travel can be as low as 155 and be as much as 195.
Yeah, wow.
So it makes it a pretty versatile bike, which I think is one of the target aims of it is providing a bike that can go from pretty much what would be a standard trail bike nowadays, 155 and say 160 fork, to a full-on DH rig. Just change out your shock and your fork and you're good to go.
That's insane.
Yeah, and that was also kind of spurred on by seeing how many athletes now are playing both in EWS and in downhill World Cup, and for a lot of the privateers, like to have multiple bikes gets really expensive, especially shipping them around.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Trying to travel with multiple bikes and 2 sets of everything, it's pretty tough. So if we can help the privateer out, narrow it down to just having one frame, and you just need 2 different shocks and 2 different forks, like that's a lot easier to package.
Yeah.
So that was definitely one of the things we wanted to take into account, because with the intent of this being a race bike, what's going to serve the customer best is giving them a bike that can do all the disciplines.
What else have you kind of looked at changing for the V2? Is there much difference there?
Yeah. So we there's some part of it's manufacturer driven, other part of it's strength. But there's some edits to the rocker where we strengthened some of that up, but we changed the metal from 6061 to 705 or 7075 aluminum. It's harder, more tensile strength. So the rear ends now, 7075. And then on the front end, the head tube and the junctions, or what we call these, are cones that transition from the chromoly tubing to essentially the main like junction box where the shock and the gearbox or BB are housed. Those are 3D printed steel. Just cones for the down tube and the seat tube, and then the head tube, and then the brace for the seat tube are all 3D printed steel.
Yeah, right.
So that was just down to ease of future manufacturing when we start making multiple frames. Cutting and coping tubes just takes time, and a lot of man hours. And when we can make a machine do it, why not? And we still get, based on the metallurgy between the chromoly tubes and the mild steel for all the junctions in the head tube, like we still get great strengths out of it, as far as, if not better than it would be with just all chromoly tubing. And so it just takes less time for setup, is the plan.
It makes it easier to prototype for you guys as well, I guess. Like you can just press print.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, press print. I can change the head angle at a whim, or we can. It gives us a little bit more flexibility to play around with weight. We've also talked about the idea of doing a tie front end option. So that's pretty cool. It saves about 1 kilo on the front end.
Wow.
A lot. Yeah. And it's still kind of heavy.
What did you go do with steel for the tubing and stuff? Again, just ease of use, or?
It was, well, for V1, it came down to what was easiest to put together for the time frame that we were working with. Because the original talk was to do it in aluminum, and even before that, the original talk was actually to do it in CNC halves out of aluminum. Was the original concept. And then after riding V1 and the guys feeling, having the ride feel of the steel on the front end, the aluminum on the rear end felt really, really good to them. And I think a lot of that plays back to, at least for Mick, his BMX days, riding a lot of, chromoly bikes, and it's just got a good resonance feeling to it compared to aluminum and carbon. And then the way that we have the rear end design, we can tune a lot of the flex in and out of it with the seat stay bridge, because it's adjustable in thickness and material. We could put in carbon back there. We could put in steel. We could put in aluminum in varying thicknesses to play around with that torsional stiffness in the rear end. No, not torsional, but the essentially the I guess, what would that be? It'd be the yaw motion of the rear axle,
which is a good thing to have.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see it on the new common cells. They play around with it as well, which I thought was interesting. They played around with running no seat stay bridge to look like running a steel plate seat stay bridge to having, I think at the last race, it was either aluminum or it was actually it looked like a plastic seat stay bridge in the back, just different types of flex, different amounts, which is really interesting because that motion of the rear tire and it's that rotation of it, like on axis, this kind of rotation is really important, plays a lot into grip. And so tuning that is important. And I think it'll be interesting to offer different types of materials for different amounts of flex for riders in the future, for, different riding styles and or different tracks. You can change it out depending on what you need.
That's like a big thing in MotoGP, right? Like they build in flex into their bikes so that they can, the tire can stay.
There's flex built into, when we're talking about two-wheel vehicles, flex is a huge part of ride feel and grip. And like I was listening to a podcast with the CEO of Stark Futures, that new electric Supercross bike. And and they were talking a lot about the time that they put like mounting sensors onto different materialed frames, from chromoly frames to aluminum frames. And they worked with a guy from MotoGP, and just how much that different materials resonance, and it's the amount of feedback that it gives to the rider, like how important that is. And so I completely agree, because it's noticeable in our bike as well, just based on the material that we choose. It'll be interesting to try the tie front end out and see what it's like, but I definitely like the ride feel of the chromoly front end, even if it does, add a bit of weight. And the cool thing we really built, especially this V2, I think the plan is to keep it the way that it is, but the modularity that we have in it. Someone could buy the frame as it is, when it's ready, and say down the line, they want to try a tie front end, they could just buy a tie front end. Or say there's, a future e-bike or a Trinity gearbox, the modularity in the aluminum side plates that we have, and the amount of essentially design room that we have in the bottom end of the bike, is pretty awesome. And
makes
so
sense.
Someone can keep their front end and then swap out, that whole junction down there for, essentially creating a different bike.
That'd be insane. Like being able to have an acoustic bike that you could make into an e-bike. Like that'd be so sick.
It's something we've talked about. I can't talk too much about it, but that's
yeah. There's new players coming into that game all the time, apparently. I read some things this morning. So that new bike should be out by the time this podcast release. I think it's coming out this weekend. I think it should be Friday night, your guys' time. So it'll be Saturday morning over here. But it'd be pretty cool. Hopefully it just breaks the internet again, right?
Yeah, that's the goal.
It's so cool
too. We were like one of, I think, 2 full suspension bikes at the Handmade show last year, and the only one with the dual crown. So we kind of stuck out like a sore thumb, which is pretty awesome. And most everything there is a roadie, which is cool. But it's nice to show something different.
I think it's cool, having like all these roadies, which are the simple, basic form of bikes, but they can be so high tech, and then the complete opposite with you guys doing massive chains and just probably blowing their minds, right? They were trying to guess what's going on there.
People were so confused about the pinion chain tensioner that we used on V1, and it's actually that location for the tensioner actually makes a lot more sense than being on the rear wheel.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
As long as your BB's drop is not too low. But it can also just be rotated on the ISG tabs out of the way. But it's, again, it's just more mass in the center of the bike.
Yeah. And I mean, the whole point of the gearbox is to get rid of a derailleur. So why put something that looks like a derailleur where the derailleur was? It's just silly.
Yeah. That was one of the other things that we did add on V2. In the dropouts, there's 2 swappable parts. So there's either just a static plate in the dropout, so which is used for gearbox.
Yeah.
Or there's actually a derail hanger that can swap out for that plate.
Sweet.
And that part, the goal is to have that as just like an individual like piece that you can just buy. So
even like single speed park rats they'd froth on that. Like you can just get rid of the hot derailleur the whole lot. And
so that's the goal, is just to essentially just have a modular bike. So if you want to run a gearbox, you can. If you want to run cassette and derailleur, you can. The bike that we're going to have at Handmade will have a 6-speed axis cassette on it. Well, like cassette and then axis derailleur.
Which is unique in itself.
It'll be definitely another like kind of like free ride build up. Which is going to be fun, kind of semenuk inspired.
Yeah, it's cool. Those AXS derailleurs in downhill form look sick.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Let's change the discussion a little bit. I'm pretty keen to see that bike, and we'll leave the rest up to our imagination. But let's talk about cars for a little bit. Like you obviously mentioned that was a huge part of your upbringing and stuff, but you've been designing liveries and stuff for drift cars for quite a while.
Yeah, for about, let's see, what was that? Like 7 years ago, I started, I started designing liveries for drifting and for time attack. I got connected to the guys at Injuku Racing via an Instagram message. And so worked with Nate Hamilton and Kevin Lawrence for a long time. I did. I worked with Kevin for longer because Nate left Injuku. But I think I did 3 of Nate's and I did 6 of Kevin's cars.
Yeah, wow.
And then did in that time a ton of other people. I've done Trans Am cars. I've done time attack. I've done even just some show cars and stuff like that. Done some artwork for Chelsea Denofa and Matt Farah, Smoky Tire, and just some fun stuff. But again, it just kind of all stemmed from what I talked about earlier, as far as just drawing cars and technical stuff as a kid. I just always have. And I started, I started doing the digital ones, like car sketches, actually as a gift to my dad.
Yeah, right.
He had been building a 1964 Ford Galaxy for like 10 years, and he had finally finished it. And so I drew it and gave him like a framed photo of it for Christmas. And I was like, oh shoot, I can do this, like just for fun. Like I can do any car that I want to. And so then I did another buddy of mine, Mickey Andrade. He works with the guys from Throttle now.
Yeah. He's he's like the Mick Williams of car racing. He's like super tidy, super. Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude. He built some amazing stuff. I got to take a ride in his EG Civic that he had.
Yeah, that thing looks sick.
It was amazing. But yeah, he was actually my boss at AccuWare for a number of years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so anyway, he had me draw his Corolla that had the S2000 swap in it. And that was one of the first cars that I did as well. And that was really fun. Yeah. And so it's just, again, just kind of one of those things, like there was the way it got started as far as like turned into like a business, which was Chase Graphics. There is a time attack driver for Injuku that had posted like a shitty sketch of what he was trying to put together for his car. And so I just messaged him on Instagram and I was like, hey, if you want help, like I can draw your car and put this together. And then he didn't respond, but then I noticed that he was sponsored by Enjuku. And so I just kind of circumvented him a little bit and emailed Enjuku directly and was like, hey, I do this. Can I get, that's what it was. He said he was sponsored by Enjuku and I needed their logo. I needed like a vector file of it. And so I emailed them. I was like, hey, can I get, your marketing content so I can put this together? And they're like, oh, you do this. Can you do it for these other 3 cars? They had another time at track driver and then Nate and Kevin's cars. And I was like, absolutely. So it then it just kind of built over the years from there.
That's insane.
But I've had to dial it back the last couple of years just because of time. Like I can only split my time so many ways between so many projects. And then now I have a brand new baby and wife and house and dog. And so I even have less time now, but
I thought babies gave you time. Like that's what I've heard from everyone.
They give you more time at home, but
like
it's all good.
Those liveries are so intricate and so crazy. Like it must be so hard it must be cool to be so creative and give them some freedom, but then also see a livery doing 200k an hour and then just hit a wall. Like, it's both sides, right?
Yeah, it's really cool. I think that was like the first taste I got of like kind of what I touched on earlier, as far as like drawing something or having an idea in my head and actually getting to see it in real life. I'd been drawing things for decades and decades, and it's just all these just ideas in my head or ideas on paper, but then to see it like in its like true like physical form, like someone actually did something with the work that I made, was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But that was a lot of fun. I got to go to a lot of different races and meet a lot of cool people and work with some really fun people. I think my favorite one that I did was, I think it was Kevin Lawrence's car. I think it was 2018. I did like this root beer brown,
cool,
and like checkered and like gold, like actual like metallic gold striping on it, like this kind of like asymmetrical pattern. And that was really fun. And what was cool is I became friends with a guy named Pat out of Canada who paints like everyone and their grandmother's helmets for FD. PBK Creations, or PB Creations is his Instagram name. And when he saw the rendering that I was doing for Kevin, I sent him over a copy and he painted the helmet to match. Which is pretty cool.
That's sick.
Yeah. That was awesome.
What do you think is the, I guess we'll keep it to Japanese imports, maybe some American stuff, but what do you think is the best looking car to design a livery for?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because I've done a lot, but I also haven't, because like almost every drift car is some version of a Sylvia. So that's funny though, because I have like just for a slight tangent on the Sylvias, I have an S13, an S14, and S15 like base, like just a center shell, and then I have all of the different front and rear ends I saved as separate files so I can swap them out because everyone does a front end or rear end conversion of some sort. And that was always super tough too, working with because I didn't install the wraps, I just did designs for them. So working with these different wrap companies, and they're always asking for dimensions, and I'm like, I can't actually give you physical dimensions because like each one of these cars is custom, because they're not like dimensionally, they're not how they came from the factory. And
so I have no way. They got tubular front ends, right? Like, there's no way.
So I have no way to give you like, here's a, like based on the wheelbase, because I know the wheelbase hasn't changed. Like here's what it's approximately going to be. And so that was always the other tough part too of that, was not having the ability to do all the installs myself or be there for the installs, was managing the quality of the installation
true.
or the execution of it, because that plays a huge factor in it, and like really had to like dictate important instructions to, you know, these wrap companies, and sometimes they'd get it and sometimes they wouldn't, because a lot of times like the easiest way for them to do it is to actually just print it on white vinyl. You actually take the design and just print it, which is always the worst quality. And a lot of my stuff has some intricate layers that I called out specific vinyls to use.
Yeah.
And that generally do better over like a paint base. And then you do the small designs, or the small portions of design in layered vinyl, which takes more work and more effort, but it looks way better. Like that's how Factory 83 does it. His stuff is his stuff is awesome. But dealing with crunch times and late builds and everything like that, like stuff didn't always get executed as well. But sorry, that was a tangent. You asked what my favorite car to design for is, and I'd have to say I think it's an E46.
Yeah, okay.
Just like cool. The lines are very geometric and pretty straight, and so it creates a lot more freedom in the different types of designs you can put on it. There's like, especially with like the S chassis and the crazy silly body kits that would go on them, they create all this additional dimension to the car that wasn't originally there, and kind of muddies up the natural aesthetics of the car. And so then when you go to lay down, say like a straight line across it, and now it's going over these, you know, blister fenders. So now the straight line is now got this like hump in it. It's just not straight anymore. And so trying to like learn how to, you know, work around those different dimensions, and having to constantly ask people like, hey, what body kit are you going to run this year?
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out like, okay, how wide are they, how much deflection do I have to account for? And where do I need to shift things so that it lays out correctly? Which again, you can only do so good on a computer if I'm not there in person to actually lay it on there. So that was always interesting. But the E46, I think, was one of the easier ones to design for, and it gave me the most kind of creative freedom. I also really like drawing on, I've done a couple Corvettes now, and those are pretty fun too.
That'd be pretty cool.
There's the interesting shape. It's an interesting challenge because the front end's so short, like height wise. So like where the crown of the tire is versus where the crown of the hood is really narrow.
Yeah, tiny.
And so, but it's also super wide. And so trying to play with the shapes 3-dimensionally to make it like translate well and match kind of the aesthetics of the car is a fun challenge.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different variations on like I could imagine trying to do something for was it Daiichi's Lamborghini, like the drift Lamborghini he had?
Oh yeah.
That would have been tough, like to make that car look cool.
Yeah. Because those Liberty Walk kits, again, they just widen it so much that it's hard to translate, like at least from what the drawings that I'm doing are all in 2D. And because I have to be able to provide an artwork file.
Yeah.
I wanted to do the designs in 3D, and sometimes I would like mock stuff up in Forza just to see how it would like translate over the body lines.
Crazy.
But but yeah, I still had to translate all of that into a flat file. And I didn't, I haven't drawn a Lamborghini, but just knowing the body shape of it, and again, kind of its different dimensions, it would be a definite challenge, which I think you can see why he kept the livery so simple. It's just flat black and slaps some logos on it.
No one wanted the job.
That was also just his style. He just likes it pretty bare bones, which is cool. Have you seen, also car tangent, but like his recent like Hakusuka, like with the V8 that's slammed on those work wheels? Oh, dude, you got to look it up. It's like this metallic orange skyline with ITBs sticking out of the hood, and it's beautiful. And then the first event, he stuffed it in the wall.
Of course.
But, yeah, I mean, just the back end, it's fixable.
I can't remember his last name.
Saito.
Yeah, the Smith of Japanese last names.
Mm-hmm.
Because I lived there for a while. Every time I put in a Japanese name, it just comes up with everything. Yeah, I can't find it. I can't remember his Insta name, but I'll have a look for it for sure.
Yeah, if not, I'll send it to you on Instagram.
Yeah, but those guys do some crazy stuff. It's so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of the things I did always want the opportunity to design for a Japanese driver, but I hadn't yet. But it'd be fun. But at the same time, it's also like I've definitely had a certain aesthetic, I would say, and the Japanese style is a very different aesthetic from mine. So it's definitely more on like the clean and less busy side of things than kind of that kind of natural design that they have for a lot of their cars. But I also really appreciate that design style too.
Oh, I just found it. Yeah, that thing's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
They have this, I mean, if you go down to the essence of their drifting and what they do, they have a zero fucks given attitude towards it. It's so sick.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I kind of wish it's BMXy, and I kind of wish mountain biking would go back to that style a little bit as well, as just ride your bike, run what you brung, and have the best time of your life with mates. It's pretty sick.
Oh, totally. I love the tech, but sometimes I agree. I get too sucked into the tech sometimes, and
it's so easy to do.
Yeah, ride less than I should.
Yeah. Oh, that's the problem with working in the bike industry, is you get to ride bikes less.
Yeah.
It's such a weird thing.
I know. I spend so much time in a silly 3D model, not a silly, but in a silly 3D model than I do on the bike. So.
Man. Well, I think we might start wrapping things up. We've talked about bikes and cars and done a bunch of things. I'll ask the 3 questions I always like to ask at the end, and you can go to bed. What advice would you have to the people listening that want to get into bike design, or, pursue a career or something in their own passion?
Research. Just research your ass off. Like, there's so much literature available, and like oh, hang on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my headphones died, so I'm gonna make sure it still hear me. But yeah, like, if it's something you really, really care about, just do your research. Like, look into it. Like, everything that I've learned and understood about kinematics and what goes into making a good bike is purely based on research. Like, I do have like some informed decision making from some of my experience working with cars and with suspension and having a lot of engineering friends. But if it's something you really care about, just give it the time of day. And specifically with bikes, I mean, I think the other thing is, if you have a bunch of friends with bikes and different bikes, like, go jump on every different kind of bike you can, like from a horse link to a BPP to a DW link to a single pivot. Like, go experience all of them, because they all ride different. And the Geo is going to fit a little bit weird, and you can kind of fudge between sizes if you need to, but go ride as many bikes as you can. Do those demo days, because that'll really educate you on what you like and what you don't like, and what feels good and what doesn't. And just just kind of, like myself, just throw yourself into it. Like, pretty much when I get home, like before I was married and before I had a kid, I would just research bikes, just start drawing bikes. Like, I also, like, for $25, you can get a copy of Linkage X3 for personal version. Yeah. Do it. Like, if you really, really want to dive into kinematics and understanding how, like, the different pivot locations and how it all works, download linkage, right? Buy a copy of it, super cheap. And he's got a bunch of pre-built, like essentially like bike templates with all the different suspension designs in there. And just, open up one of the standard models, and just play around with it. And there's a whole library of like all of the current bikes and or past bikes from other people that have modeled them and then made them public.
Yeah. Right.
And just open them up, like find your bike, guaranteed someone's modeled it, and see what it looks like and see what happens when you change something or when you like increase or decrease your front chainring. How does that affect, how your bike rides? Or when you decrease or increase your tire size, because that changes your rolling diameter and your BB height, even a little bit, but you'll get to understand how those different things affect how the bike rides from a kinetic standpoint, not from a ride feel standpoint. Obviously that's a different thing, but educate yourself on both sides, understand the graphs, understand the numbers, understand what goes into making that bike happen, and then go ride something that's similar to it and understand how it feels. It's got to marry those two, that theoretical and that practical together.
Yeah. Is there anything you would have done differently to get to the point where you're at now?
I've thought about that a lot. Because after graduating high school, I had plans to get a mechanical engineering degree. And, but I think I started to lose patience. I just wanted to do something. Just tired of sitting in the classroom learning theory at someone else's pace.
Yeah.
And so I dropped out of school, started working, actually at AccuWare, in their marketing department, just doing design work, and just tried to put myself in places that I could get close to what I wanted. And in that, at that time for me, it was working with cars. So I got to work at a suspension company for cars, which was really cool. So all that to say, no, I don't think I would change anything. I think the experiences that I've had bode well for themselves. And even though, I don't have mixed level of knowledge when it comes to the fine details of, how to make something work perfectly, I can get it 85% of the way there. And then that's why I have friends like Mick who can get it the rest of the way and make sure it actually functions great. But that's been a fun process too, to just like throw my ideas at Mick, whether it's in a model or a conversation or whatnot, and either get validation back, like, okay, let's try this, but let's tweak it a little bit, or like, yes, that's an awesome idea, or like, no, that's super dumb. Why would you think that? It's been really great. And having friends like that has been really awesome. But to answer your question, no, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. Yeah, I think that's why most companies have employees, right? No one can do everything, right? So you got to hire the people that can. Last question, which is always the hardest, but if you're lacking motivation or struggling to get something done, is there anything that motivates you, like especially like music or anything like that you can't listen to get G'd up? Yeah,
I don't listen to, I listen to music, but it's definitely more of like a in the background thing. Like it's not something that I seek out. As far as like something that motivates me, I think it's like I just get hyper focused on like what I'm working on, like obsessive a little bit. And so when I can really visualize the end result, really gets me motivated. So like early on, before I was starting to 3D model things, when I was just like sketching stuff, like I was a lot less motivated because it was like really kind of theoretical.
Yeah.
But when I started to take things to the next step and start drawing things in the computer and actually like seeing it fit up, and then animating the joints and making sure everything was rotating correctly. Like those are the kind of those like milestones that keep me going, is like just those little pictures and seeing the end result.
Yeah.
And like getting a good grasp on like, okay, this is exactly what I want it to look like. Even if at the end, it doesn't end up looking like that. But if I can visualize it, then it's attainable to me. But if I can't, it's a lot harder. And so I get a lot less motivated.
I fully understand that. Yeah. Yeah. 100% understand that. Easy, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on and having a good long chat and talking about everything. Yeah. It's been really cool.
Absolutely. It's been good to chat.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll try and get this out just after the bike show. And we'll make it happen.
Awesome. Love it.
Easy, man. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the night. Thanks, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Bye.
There we go, guys. Another great episode in the bag. Chase has had a really cool story. He talks about a bunch of different markets and jobs and everything else he's been into over his life. Super interesting to hear his kind of DIY, self-taught attitude towards a lot of his jobs and a lot of the things he's really good at. As per usual, thanks to Trek, FE Sports, NS Dynamics, Tailored Trails, Lead Out Sports, Franked, Dirt Surfers, Crush, and Fist for all their ongoing support. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you support the guys that support us. Yes, there's a lot of support there. And jump over to their website, grab some of those sweet goodies. Use Beyond the Tape 10, or Beyond the Tape 15 at the checkout. It's a bit of a lucky dip. One day I'll actually get around to organising that. And yeah, if you want to support the podcast for free, tell your mum, tell your dad, tell your auntie, tell your neighbour, tell the horse down the road. Let them know about the podcast. Anyway, until the next one, go have a bunch of fun.